Hey y'all, it's entry number 59 of this off-season series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver, Dallas Cowboys. We'll start with the positives with CeeDee Lamb's fantasy profile. More work with Amari Cooper gone. The Dallas Cowboys traded away Amari Cooper this past offseason to the Cleveland Browns. Amari Cooper has been one of the better wide receivers in the NFL, as he's had 70 or more receptions, 1,000 or more receiving yards, and 5 or more receiving touchdowns in 5 of his first 7 seasons in the NFL, and he's seen over 100 targets in each of the past 2 seasons, with 130 targets in 2020 and 104 targets in 2021. With Cooper gone, CeeDee Lamb becomes the clear number 1 wide receiver in Dallas and could see his targets increase by quite a bit. The next thing I really like about CeeDee Lamb's fantasy profile is that he's got wide receiver friendly coaches. Dallas head coach Mike McCarthy and offensive coordinator Kellen Moore have been 2 of the best in the league at getting production out of their wide receiver rooms over the course of their NFL careers in an offensive coordinator or head coaching role. Having wide receiver friendly coaches will make it easier for CeeDee Lamb to see a healthy workload each week. The last thing I really like about CeeDee Lamb's fantasy profile is that he's got a good passing quarterback. Over his last 37 games, Dallas Cowboys starting quarterback Dak Prescott has totaled 949 completions on 1,414 passing attempts for 11,207 passing yards, 76 passing touchdowns, and 25 interceptions. Having an above-average passing quarterback makes it a lot easier for CeeDee Lamb to finish as a WR1 in 2022. Moving on to some of the concerns with CeeDee Lamb's fantasy profile. Red zone usage. So far in his career, CeeDee Lamb hasn't been utilized a ton in the red zone. During the 2021 season, Lamb saw 15 red zone targets, the 3rd most on the Cowboys, and tied for the 31st most in the NFL according to NFL Savant. During the 2020 season, Lamb saw 13 red zone targets, the 4th most on the Cowboys, and tied for the 55th most in the NFL according to NFL Savant. He scored just 5 touchdowns his rookie year and 6 touchdowns in his sophomore year, and given his red zone usage thus far, there's some legit questions about what his touchdown upside looks like. The next concern I have with CeeDee Lamb's fantasy profile is that he needs to make the jump to live up to current fantasy expectations. During the 2021 season, CeeDee Lamb finished as the WR14 in standard with 153.8 total fantasy points and 9.6 fantasy points per game. The WR18 in half PPR formats with 193.3 total fantasy points and 12.1 fantasy points per game, and the WR19 in full PPR formats with 232.8 total fantasy points and 14.6 fantasy points per game according to Fantasy Pros. Considering he is being drafted as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver on both sites, this isn't a situation where he can just be as good as he was last year to meet expectations. He absolutely needs to improve in order to be of value at his current ADP. The last major concern I have with CeeDee Lamb's fantasy profile is that he's not top 10 in a lot of major efficiency metrics yet. Obviously, this is a really nitpicky concern as it's early in CeeDee Lamb's career, as he's entering just his 3rd season in the NFL. During the 2021 season, Lamb ranked 12th in yards per route run with 2.27, 19th in yards per target with 9.2, 28th in yards per reception with 13.9, 42nd in target separation with 1.65, 19th in fantasy points per route run with 0.48, and 24th in fantasy points per target with 1.94 among wide receivers according to Player Profiler. In addition, last year Lamb ranked 31st in target share with 20%, 32nd in wide receiver target share with 32.9%, 31st in air yard share with 26.5%, 22nd in targets per route with 23.6%, and 15th in receiving yards per air yard with 0.89 according to fantasy data. He's not necessarily bad in any of these areas, but we have to be a little more picky with CeeDee Lamb's fantasy profile now that he's being drafted as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. Some additional thoughts on CeeDee Lamb's fantasy profile. During the 2021 season, in half PPR formats, CeeDee Lamb had 3 out of 16 games with 0 to 5 fantasy points, 5 out of 16 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 3 out of 16 games with 10 to 15 fantasy points, 3 out of 16 games with 15 to 20 fantasy points, and 2 out of 16 games with over 20 fantasy points according to fantasy data. The Dallas Cowboys drafted Jalen Tolbert in the 3rd round of the 2022 NFL Draft. He may have more of an impact than the general consensus currently believes. Personal opinion: CeeDee Lamb is going off the board as WR8 about pick 18 overall on ESPN and WR6 about pick 18 overall on Yahoo. I can't dispute this ranking among wide receivers too much given that he's a clear number 1 wideout on the Dallas Cowboys now, but there are some running backs I'd rather have at his overall ADP. For each of these entries, we will highlight a charitable cause or organization. CeeDee Lamb has donated to Elephant in the Room, Inc. in the past. The charity was founded in 2017 for the purpose of helping others who do not have the courage or knowledge to help themselves deal with the effects of mental health. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you enjoyed this entry, be sure to like and subscribe.